Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on this lovely planet. And thank you for joining the PKI Solutions, PKI Insight webinar for February. This webinar is going to be strengthening security in banking and finance with PKI. And this is kind of an important part of security profiles that corporations should have. Most of the banking companies most likely have a PKI. They also probably have a pretty robust firewall. The issue, though, the firewall is not going to save you. Maybe some of the cryptography within a PKI will. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce our presenter today, and most of you probably know. And I'll introduce myself. I'm Brad Butlick. If you don't know me, I'm the Director of Sales here at PKI Solutions. And the person you should know, and if you don't, you need to get to know, is Mark Cooper. Mark Cooper is the president and founder of PKI. He is incredibly knowledgeable as it pertains to PKI. So he's the one that's going to be spending a lot of time talking about this particular topic. So I'm going to transfer this over to Mark. So Mark, take it away. Talk to us, educate us about how PKI can be used to strengthen the banking and finance. So go for it. Thanks.
Well, and Brad, you're no slouch yourself when it comes to PKI and crypto. And I think that the slide calling out that the crypto geek, I think one of the great things is just the experience in this space that you've brought over the decades. So today this is a really interesting topic for us because this is a space that we work with customers regularly in traditional finance as well as fintech. It's a diverse space, but it's also something that embraces a lot of other customers. And when we talk about finance, some customers may not realize that they're in the finance business. We work with large retailers that their entire point of sale system has a financial tie back and compliance requirements and security requirements. A lot of cash register systems use certificates and PKI to provide identity and encryption. This actually goes out into the casino and gaming space. Most people don't know that most modern video poker and slot machines are all driven by PKI. And there's actually a financial standard by the International Gaming Association that says, hey, here's how you use PKI to secure these financial transactions that are happening on casino floors. So this is something that touches so many parts of the ecosystem. So we thought it would be really important to kind of talk about what's happening in the financial sector and why some of the common problems we see exist in this space and why companies have to address it. So we're going to talk a little bit about operational and security aspects, but then we're also going to talk about the compliance and regulatory side. We do have a chat going, so for those of us watching this or joining live, if you have questions or any of those items, we'll be working through a Q&A session as well. And then obviously we'll be making this available online through our streaming platforms and partners afterwards. So if we kind of jump into why this is an important area, when we kind of think about the financial area, as I talked about, this happens not just in the point of sale systems or in the casino floors. In the financial space, there's a direct financial impact to having strong cybersecurity controls in place. Unlike a traditional enterprise that may look at their business and say, what is the value or the impact if I don't have adequate cyber controls in place? Maybe there's a disruption to my workforce. Maybe I have an outage to this system or that system. In the financial space, there is a direct correlation of ROI. If I don't have strong cybersecurity controls, I don't have controls over my finances. I don't have controls over my money. I can directly lose money. If I can't move money, if I can't do transactions securely, I have regulatory impact. And then probably the most important thing is the intangible thing that affects all financial transactions. When you think about digital transactions, anything where we're moving money, storing money, there's inherently a certain amount of trust that has to exist. If you don't trust a merchant, if you don't trust a bank, if you don't trust a processor, that brand is all that they're selling. And if they ever have a cybersecurity lapse, those brands, that integrity, that trust is gone. It used to be we would have a run on the bank when there was a perception that a bank didn't have enough money in its vault. It's really hard for a bank to survive a run, because once people start thinking that they can't trust their bank, they take money out. And then when they see people taking money out, they take more money out. It's a non-ending cycle. So we see consistently that those brands that are built around this model of trust, that when they don't have adequate controls in place, it affects your brand and it ultimately affects the business. So these financial institutions, whether they're doing point of sale systems, whether they're in the commerce space, whether they're doing finance, you're essentially securing your brand and your business. While there are individual transactions and regulatory things, at the end of the day, this is as much about preventing a cybersecurity breach as protecting your brand. Because once that brand trust is gone, the business is gone. We see this in things like public PKI environments, where once a public CA isn't trusted, that trust and brand is affected. You can no longer operate. So I think in the financial space, this goes way beyond just, here's the function of my business. It's about protecting the brand. The other one is, it's a very clear and deliberate target. So as we look at threat actors, they know this is where the money is. If you're in the finance space, you're moving money, you're processing money, you're storing financial transactions. There's a direct incentive to adversaries to want to find weaknesses and want to find places that they can compromise this type of environment. So you have very opposing efforts all around this brand. You have threat actors that have every incentive in the world to go after it, and you have organizations that have to do everything they can to protect their brand. We know that PKI is a very fundamental, foundational technology. It's something that exists across every ecosystem, across every enterprise. It is the technology that enables the financial transactions to occur digitally. It is what allows the communications, that authorizes those communications to happen digitally. Because of that PKI has to be not only in place, but it has to be available. It has to be resilient, and it has to be secure. Because if you're building firewalls on top, if you're building data encryption technologies on top, but the weakness is your PKI, and it's not resilient and it's not secure, none of those higher level systems are going to function. Which essentially means you're building your brand, you're building that trust on the PKI. And for most financial companies, that PKI is a black box. They deploy it, they design it, they operate it, and then they don't know that there's anything wrong until it breaks. So regardless of the attention that may be from a regulation side of, oh, you need strong identity controls and multi-factor, when all that boils down to the PKI, it may not be the word that is spelled out, but it's the one Achilles heel that a lot of organizations are frankly missing. One of the things that we just added, no, this is an ever-changing place, and we thought this would be a good audience to do this poll, is in Europe, they had a regulation that recently went into effect. It was actually published in 2023, called DORA, the Digital Operational Resilience Act. And this is all around requirements in Europe for financial institutions that have very specific cyber resilience controls in place to make sure that these transactions are secure, that if there is a breach, that those transactions can still occur in a safe manner, that there's availability. While not in the US yet, we thought it would be an interesting one to find out how many people are aware of DORA or are already making plans to embrace that, because that's something that is going to greatly affect financial institutions that are in the US, let alone the rest of the world. And that's really going to kind of drive a lot of the things that have to get done today around making sure that your cybersecurity controls are in place to address these things. And it looks like so far there's more questions about what DORA is than those that are saying, yes, we're doing something about it. So that doesn't surprise me. Here in the US, things like GDPR and privacy controls really kind of came along initially in Europe, and then were eventually adopted in the US. For the multinational financial organizations, most have business outside of the U.S. are going to be subject to this. DORA is really going to change how organizations have to think about addressing the resilience. So part of the challenge is this old management approach to things like PKI isn't going to work well in a modern infrastructure of, hey, if I have to have strong resilience and controls in place, having this fundamental technology that underpins my brand, underpins my trust, drives all of these higher level things like cloud governance and identities, and non-human identities, if that's all dependent on the PKIs, and that is this black box, and I don't have controls, I don't have visibility, I don't have reporting, there's going to be issues. Financial institutions, I think, are going to be greatly impacted by things like DORA. So it looks like almost 70% of people said that they're not sure what DORA is. So that doesn't surprise me. It just went into enforcement in January of this year. So I think we're going to start to see a lot more of that coming up. So if you haven't looked in the DORA, if you're in the financial space, definitely check out DORA. You can look up very easily. Just look up DORA regulations, and you can see what's coming out of the EU today.
I don't think GDPR has been fully implemented in the United States either. So.
No, and that's probably a good thing. I don't know if you've ever looked through a GDPR regulation and what has to go into a contract. It is cumbersome. It is very difficult. I will at least say the bones of what's in DORA is a critical thing. It is already about making sure that cyber controls are in place for operational resilience. And this is a bit more than the old-fashioned approach of, hey, you need to have strong authentication, you need to have secondary approvals, you need to have data encryption. This is about resilience, which obviously includes a security aspect, but it's very much around availability and resilience and natural disasters and cyber threats. It is very much about making sure that your entire stack is going to be resilient. And this is a place that we've been passionate about PKI solutions for a long time. So if we break this down, DORA talks a lot about operational resilience. What are some of the operational risks? When we think about the fact that the PKI is this foundational technology, it sits underneath maybe what your CISO is talking about. And I've been in this space for decades. I know that most CISOs don't speak PKI. It's just not part of their language. And in fact, I went to one of our large retail customers and went to a retreat that they had. And the CISO actually got up and talked about their objectives for the year. And PKI was up there. I was frankly floored. It was just one of those things where a lot of times they're thinking about trying to achieve X, Y, Z in their goals. And it's dependent on PKI. And I'm just kind of used to that of when they say X, Y, Z, I know it includes PKI. The fact that he had it up there and embraced it, it is a testament to the importance. And, the interesting thing is they've been much better now of working through these operational resilience and security controls. And it's nice that we're part of that solution. So when it does have that visibility, it really does help. But having the PKI foundation, when there's an outage, it's a disrupting outage. This is not a technology that tends to be isolated in one place. We work with customers that are responsible for moving very large portions of money to the US Treasury, credit card transactions, consumer transactions, a lot of the modern things like Venmo and PayPal. All of these are all digital transactions. And when there's an impact at the PKI level, it affects those transactions, it affects those brands. And more importantly, this is not just another, hey, I have an SSL certificate that's expired. Yes, that is impactful, that's a problem. But here's the interesting thing. When we have one certificate that expires and my CLM system missed it or maybe did catch it, it tends to be one system to another system. When we have resilience issues, operational issues with a PKI, it affects everything. So when you look at organizations like a casino or a retail operator, they've got thousands of point of sale systems. When you have a central PKI problem, every system is affected. As opposed to this one certificate on this one cash register isn't working. Great, go to the other cash register. when you're dealing with large payment transactions, whether they're international wires, whether they are moving within internal systems, you affect that entire business. So having the operational ability in place for that financial PKI is considerable. And part of the problem, frankly, with PKI is it's a technology that was designed to be, really distributed. The reason that we see it in IoT, in the enterprise, in the financial space is that one, it scales very well, but it doesn't require any central authority to really be involved in the verification of certificates. The problem is there's not a lot of visibility in there. The assumption was PKI would be up and running and available and secure at all times. I think everybody's now learned that that's not a given. You can't depend on it in that way. It takes management, it takes operation controls around this. So a lot of the visibility issues we have is the obvious things like expirations of certificates and CRL, but it's more specific than that. What about, is my CA available to publish a CRL? Can I tell that my CA is in an unhealthy state hours or days before a CRL expires? Again, this is the black box. A lot of organizations say, I have a PKI and once in a while my CRL expires. Well, great. What is the impact to the organization when there's an outage? And why don't you have that visibility to look at the problem when it occurs? Because a lot of these problems exist for days or weeks before they ever impact the organization, but there's a lack of visibility. We actually have a case study that's available that you can pull in the resources. One of the customers we worked with at Greenhill in the financial space, this was a space where the customer even told us, hey, I always just kind of treated my PKI like something that was just there. I kind of ignored it. I hear that a lot. And they just kind of assumed it was just one of those things that broke from time to time. And it wasn't until they really started focusing on, hey, how can we eliminate the downtime? How can we get rid of the business impacting outages by putting visibility in? How can we get that real-time monitoring and visibility? And this case study talks a lot about how they were able to shift their management of the infrastructure from a very reactive, something's broken, we need to go fix it, into, hey, this is a stable foundation for us to build a business on. Now, the other side is the security. We've got operations, an important element that we need in the financial side, but then what about that threat side, that security posture? We know that there's direct adversarial risks. We see this in everything from crypto exchanges, where there's direct adversarial desire to steal Bitcoin and other types of crypto, right into just financial transactions of fraudulent wires, into direct theft from ATMs. All of these have a very significant financial impact that are driven from the security side. So if we've addressed the operational side from improved monitoring and visibility, we still need to address what are the risks, because I can have a very reliable and operational PKI, but what about the risk side? So we know that PKI, frankly, is something that a lot of organizations struggle with having sufficient subject matter expertise, having enough time to manage. There's a lot of bits and pieces itself. And I like that comment. I always hear that the PKI runs itself. No, that's pretty much, I stuck PKI in a corner. I just wait until it blows up and then I have to deal with it. It doesn't run itself. It just gets neglected until it needs attention. There's not a lot else in the modern IT space where we deploy something and we just wait for it to blow up because we don't bother to manage it. That's not the modern approach. From a vulnerability standpoint, vulnerabilities exist within the PKI, just like they exist within firewalls, just like they exist within data encryption. But in this case, because it underpins everything, if our identities are secured by PKI, if our data is protected by PKI, and the vulnerabilities exist there, that's where they're going to get exploited. We know that there's growing risks around vulnerabilities within PKI. A few years ago, Spectre Ops published a great article, actually giving a very detailed recipe approach to here's the vulnerabilities that can exist in PKI, and here's how to take advantage of it. It's no longer just a theoretical bits and pieces. Here's a recipe and tools that you can use to take advantage of these things. But a lot of the vulnerabilities that exist within a PKI are frankly too esoterical. There's some switch that's hidden here, something that's sitting inside of a certificate, something that takes this step and then another step and another step to get to. Well, if you don't have visibility of all those bits and pieces, it's hard to know if that PKI is secure. And frankly, one of the fundamental questions we have with financial institutions is, are you looking at using certificates because you want to enable some business function, or are you trying to use certificates to secure your infrastructure? Because frankly, they're two different things. If you just want a certificate so that that function for that other application works, you're probably not interested in security. You're probably just trying to get that thing to work, and you're not paying much attention to your security infrastructure. Thankfully, most of them say, hey, I'm trying to do this to improve my security. I'm trying to do this to improve my transactions, to improve my data, to protect my brand. Well, if you don't know what vulnerabilities are there, that's the problem. And PKI, when treated like a black box, when put into the corner or just assume it runs itself, there are too many things that can be left in the wrong state. Not only that, but one of the things that was transformational for us is we used to only be able to work with customers on a consulting basis, meaning we were there in point in time, we could design the perfect PKI, document it, deploy it, get it running. But then the next day, when an administrator is following documentation from Palo Alto or Cisco or God, one of the other vendors out there with bad documentation that says, oh, click this thing and then do this thing and introduce this thing so that our application functions, guess what? You've inadvertently introduced risks into the environment. So
mainly we'd be calling that vulnerability drift.
Vulnerability drift. And I always kind of joke about having a documentation hall of shame of vendors that put out poor documentation of what certificate things you need to get their stuff to function, because they have no regard for what you do to your PKI as long as they're up and running. What that means is you have not only those authorized changes, but also potential unauthorized changes. And it's hard to discern those. Is this a change that was made maliciously? Is it something that was done by an administrator? It's intent, and intent is hard to judge in anything. But eventually things drift over time. What was right today, what was right a year ago, looks very different today. And the only methodology that was available for that kind of stuff was a pen test or assessments, a point in time sort of thing is, hey, here's how it looks today, remediate this thing. But guess what? All that thing did, that pen test that you did, that assessment, all it did was tell you where you've been vulnerable for the last year or two since your last test. It doesn't actually help you because the moment that it's done, it's immediately out of date. So doing things like pen testing, which by the way, almost every organization that ever has a pen test that includes their PKI fails. One of the interesting things that we've seen from organizations that shift to a proactive approach to monitoring their resilience and security is 100% pass rate of their PKI portion of their pen test. That doesn't happen with any other way. Now, the last part, banks, financial institutions, payment processors, retailers, they love regulation. No, they don't, but they're subject to a lot. There's been a lot that's been out there, whether it's PCI, GDPR, now we've got things like DORA. A lot of regulations are in place. And when you look at what they're trying to do at the end of the day, is they're trying to establish a trustworthy transaction space. They're trying to provide trust for the consumer, trust for the business, essentially the customer and the bank doing things in a secure manner, because we're really dealing with digital currency. We're dealing with digital transactions. There's a lot of regulations that are out there. And I think the one good thing that we see is the financial institutions that we work with that pay attention to resilience and to security wind up with a better foundational technology that pulls them away less from their other areas of focus. And one of the things that we see is most cybersecurity tools are one of maybe 15 or 16 that a team owns. There's no such thing as the firewall person or the PKI person or the antivirus person. It doesn't exist anymore. Most cybersecurity teams own multiple tools. Well, when something like PKI keeps pulling that attention away, It affects the brand, it affects your customers, it affects your integrity, but it also pulls you away from other projects. And it becomes a very expensive thing not to address. So having things in place where you're addressing these regulations and doing things proactively changes that. We know that by having the visibility, it makes it easier to meet things like audit requirements. Are you reviewing the environment? Do you know what's going on? Can you report on it? Can you prove that you're in compliance with those things? And by having real-time tools, it's a much easier thing to do than having a once a year snapshot. So what are some of the things you could do today? I think if you think about your infrastructure, if you're in the financial transaction space, do you have good visibility of your PKI? I'm not talking about the output. CLMs, it's a whole other problem. Yes, important thing. But do you know the operational nature of your CA right now? Do you know if it's in a healthy state? Is it going to be able to publish a CRL tomorrow, in an hour from now? Is it secure? Are the identities that you're issuing following the best practices? Are they as secure as they can be? If you don't have that confidence, then you are waiting for a problem to occur. So there are solutions. We're definitely in the place of trying to solve problems with a name like PKI Solutions. We try to solve and provide solutions in the PKI space. Tools like PKI Spotlight are a great way of giving that real-time visibility of resilience and security, so that any moment you're not waiting for an outage, you have the confidence that what you're doing is really the best foundation of what you do. So in summary, there's a lot of changes happening in the PKI space. We are definitely seeing new regulations coming out that are affecting identities, encryption, the underlying PKI itself. I think DORA is just one of many things that we're going to see in the future. This is something that affects not just the bank. This is the fintech company. This is retailers who are often operating very large point of sale systems. If you don't think of yourself in the financial business, you should. Just because you sell a widget and you have 100,000 stores, you probably have 500,000 cash registers. You're in the financial business. Needing to think about, how do I make this technology secure and reliable? I think the 1980s approach of, hey, I deployed it and now I'm focused on my firewall isn't going to cut it anymore. We're going to see more regulations around DORA. You have to embrace more real-time information. And we're starting to see that from ITDR and other types of firewall systems and SIM systems. Having real-time intelligence is the only way to keep up with this. Having a foundational thing that you only check in on once a year and you hope it doesn't blow up may have been the way that you managed the technology in the past. It just can't be the way that you do it going forward.
The other thing, people are more organizations are adding functionality to their base PKI. Yeah. And in most cases, the base PKI was implemented for maybe one system, and now they're asking it to do 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 systems. Exactly. And they just don't have wasn't designed for that.
Yeah, it just gets used in more and more places, and that's just kind of that drift. Hey, we intended it for this purpose. It's done a reasonably good job. Now we're going to start using it for these 5 or 6 other things. It's drifted. What it was designed to do is very different than what it's being used for today, but it's still this big black hole. It's this foundational thing that is often neglected, and it bites people. It's just so funny to me, because this is a space that we work in so much, that it's such an obvious problem of where visibility and attention needs to be spent. And a lot of times the biggest challenge is just apathy. Well, we've always done it that way, and yes, it blows up a couple times a year. I think one of the interesting things that we were going to share as we wrap up here, Brad, was what we've got coming up next month. It's something kind of exciting.
Yeah, next month, March 20th, mark your calendars. We're going to have another one of our webinars. This one's called Unlocking the Power of HSM. And one of the reasons why we're doing it in March is very, very soon, probably next week, we will be announcing that we're the absolute first company to ever have a monitoring system that will monitor both the Entrust Encipher and the Thales Luna HSMs in a single interface. These two companies absolutely despise each other. They'll never work together. So we're going to act like Switzerland here. And we've developed a system that allows you to look at both systems simultaneously. And this is important within the banking community, because that's my experience, because I've spent 15 years in the HSM space, that the banking community has pretty much every HSM known to man within their walls. This is the first time they'll actually be able to look at two of them, the two major brands, through the same screen. And we're going to talk about why HSMs are still important. While I'm no longer associated with an HSM company, I'm still a big believer in the power that an HSM brings, especially as we're kind of approaching that post-quantum state within the world. So, next month's webinar.
And this is a really interesting, the ability to look at the on-prem HSMs, a cloud HSM, multiple vendors all at the same time. We'll be bringing more vendors into the mix, but even just having two in one platform is the world's first, let alone once we start bringing 3 and 4 in. But I think between the two of them, that's 80% of the market share of HSMs across the space. So something that we're particularly excited for our financial customers, as well as customers that are using a large amount of HSMs in other areas. So somehow, Brad, you and I, we've wasted another half hour talking PKI and geeking out. I can't believe how quickly this time goes. There's so much to talk about in this space, and I'm always up to talking to financial companies that may be struggling with this or are kind of ready to protect your brand, do something that's a more modern approach. So if there's ever anyone out there that wants to have a follow-up conversation, it's obviously more than we can do in 30 minutes. So do reach out. We'd love to have the conversation. And hopefully everybody joins us next month to hear about the HSM side of things. And we'll be making this available on our YouTube channel shortly. So thank you for joining us this month.
Thank you.
All right.
See you next month.